As I'm sure any of you who have ever met or have been in the same room as an Irish person during the month of October will know, Halloween is Irish. I know I'm not breaking any new ground here by saying this, but I've always had a fascination with Irish folklore and mythology. That being said, I wasn't really happy enough to just log Halloween in the box in my brain labeled cool things Ireland did. So I went into this research with two main questions. Number one, what were the origins of Halloween really like in the land of saints and scholars? And two, how did it get gentrified to the point that now it draws criticism that this once holiest of days has gotten too commercial? So join me on this Halloween and find out how an ancient, sacred day of the dead turned into a holiday of candy, questionable outfits, and pumpkin spice every day. There is a hill in County Meath near the Midlands of Ireland. The Hill of Word nowadays may not look like much, but to the Celts that lived here over 3,000 years ago, Cnut Tlogta, as it was called, was a very special sight indeed. Tlogta, Old Irish meaning earth spear, was a goddess of possibly lightning and thunder, though labeling God of X isn't really accurate to the Irish pantheon. There's a lot of crossover between gods and jobs and titles, etc. Tlogta was the daughter of Mulcrui, a druid and sun god. I'm just going to put a little trigger warning here for SA, so if you don't want to hear about that, you can skip to this point in the video. The written story goes that Tlogta was met by three sons of an evil mage named Simon Magus, who took and forcefully impregnated her. 9 months later, she gave birth to 3 different sons, one for each of the unwanted fathers. Irish mythology has told us to not always trust the written sources, and we get back to this story later. What's important right now is that Tlogta died during that childbirth. Since then, the Celts kicked off celebrations on the hill that bore her name, in the hopes possibly to rekindle the flame that she so represented on Earth. Now, this seems to be kind of a later development, as archaeological evidence on the hill dates back to around 1200 BCE. But other evidence from around the country tells us that some sort of holiday like this has been celebrated in Ireland for as long as at least 5,000 years. It's easy to see why this date was chosen for a holiday though. Samhain, the Irish word for Halloween. No, not the name of an ancient demon. I'm looking at you, Supernatural.
This witch is summoning a demon, and not just any demon. Samhain. Am I supposed to be impressed?
Sam meaning summer and Fuin meaning end. In modern Irish, Samhain is still the name for the month of November. To the Celts in Ireland, and I'm sure everyone living in Ireland will agree, there were only 2 seasons in Ireland, summer and winter. If you've ever been to Ireland, you know why. Yaltna, meaning return of the light, is the holiday celebrated on the 1st of May every year and caps off the winter, just as Samhain ends the summer. So this left the 1st of November in a prime spot for celebrations. By November and December, most parts of the country are only getting about 2 to 3 hours of sunshine a day. This is also a time when all of your harvest is collected and stored, your fattest animals will be slaughtered to save you from having to keep them fed on your ration supplies. With all of that done, it was time to hunker down for the next 6 months in the cold and the dark and pray that you've done enough all year to stave off that hunger until the sun rose again in the new year. Apart from all of the practical reasons to celebrate a harvest festival, I think now it's time to talk about death. See, the world we are living in isn't the only one. The Irish language is a magical thing, built almost as much on the supernatural world as it is on the physical one. Where we live, the physical world is called the Ciampar. Where all of the spirits live is the altar. There is also the world of Tír na nÓg, where the hero Oisín lived for centuries. There is the underworld, thought to be kept under the earth by the weight of the sacred hills like the Hill of Uisneach, which we use to keep the deadly Fomorians at bay. Then there is the spirit world. Whether these are all different worlds, different places within our world, or all part of one large spirit realm is kind of difficult to parse. But from what we can gather in stories, at least, the Celts believe that the spirit world to be its own separate world with its own orbit. During the entire month of October, the spirit world creeps closer and closer and closer to our Earth, and on the last of the month, the worlds are practically touching and overlapping. This leaves the gate between worlds wide open. Of course, this means more incursions by spirits, some good, some bad, but it also gives us our best chance to guide the year's dead to their final resting place. As well as this, Halloween was a great time for making predictions about the future, as the presence of spirits gives more strength to the magic of clairvoyance. Most people use this time to make brack, a fruit loaf eaten in October, which to this day still has a ring hidden inside of it. Whoever finds the ring while eating brack will be married by the next Halloween. Apple parings dropped to the floor would show the initials of your future spouse, and cabbage stalks were used by girls to determine the posture of their future partners. Hazelnuts were burned, and if one or more popped like popcorn, then it was a bad sign for any future relationships. These, along with many other rituals, were performed to tell your future, mostly about your love life. This brings us to one of the lasting legacies of Irish mythology, the fairies. Often depicted as cruel, like stealing babies from the crib to replace them with a changeling, harbingers of death, like the banshee, or devious tricksters at best, like the leprechaun. Though all of these could be true and more, we have to remember that in Irish folklore, there is no such thing as an unbiased opinion. Many of these stories weren't written down until well after the 11th century, by which point most of Ireland had converted to Christianity. And at that point in time, the only people who knew how to read and write were missionaries, who were actively trying to paint anything pagan as satanic. This is even an idea that survives to this day. The Halloween is satanic and celebrates the demon god Samhain, who now makes up one of the 66 seals of hell, even though there is no god named Samhain. And the celebration we have on Halloween is millennia older than the Christian god or hell. So no, not all fairies were evil. We can use the Irish translation of fairies as evidence of this, Aes or people of the burial mound. If you've ever seen an Irish UNESCO site, you know we love our burial mounds to bid farewell to the dead. Using this translation, it seems like fairies are just the ghosts of the dead or the spirits of the Tuatha De Danann, Ireland's gods. Samhain was our way of lighting ritual fires and guiding the spirits to their new home. And the other spirits that either didn't want to or weren't allowed to pass on may have remained to cause trouble in all the stories that we know and love. So it was in our best interest to give them a good chance at finding the spirit world. So that's the why of Samhain. Now let's talk about the how. Before the days of Governor of Tasteville and Brave Warrior America, what was the night known for? Well, the stories tell that on the hill of Tlanta, druids sparked a sacred bonfire. Meanwhile, everyone else across the country extinguished their flames and let the country succumb to total darkness. I don't want to skim over that, so let's just think about it for a moment. Millennia ago, when Ireland looks like this in autumn and you have no North Face jackets to keep yourself warm, you surrender entirely to the dark. The druids would then bring some of the sacred flame to the much more secular hill of Tara. Once lit there, runners light their torches and run to the nearby villages where everybody has their own bonfire set up and ready to be lit. From there, the whole country turned into one big tinderbox relay race with everyone trying to get some of the holy fire. Once lit, the bonfires were used as a site for ceremonial sacrifices. Eamon Kelly, former keeper of antiquities at the National Museum of Ireland, says about the bonfire, as Tlanta was known as a goddess of the sun, the Samhain fire ceremonies could have been an attempt to recognize or even protect light and warmth against the growing darkness of winter, as well as obviously representing the sun itself. We know that harvest crops were sacrificed, along with the fattened animals we mentioned earlier, but then there are the lurid accounts of human sacrifice at Samhain. So what's the evidence for human sacrifice? None, really, not yet anyway. Basically just Roman authors like Julius Caesar and Pliny the Elder writing about barbaric Germanic Celts as an excuse to carry out genocide against their enemies. Whether or not these sacrifices happened is still very much up for debate, but the story of Germans equals Celts, Celts equals human sacrifices, therefore all Celts sacrifice humans has taken hold. I'm not saying this thing definitely didn't happen, as at some point in history it probably did, just as in most early cultures. As of yet, we just have no hard evidence either way. While all of this was going on, there were other things that the average Joseph could do to celebrate. Farmers, along with sacrificing some food, would also leave a hare's corner when harvesting. a small corner in the field which got its name because it's where hares would run to hide after the rest of the field was harvested. This was left for any wandering spirits trying to find their way and might want to grab a snack. Meanwhile, the wives would cook and leave out a plot of cailleach, or witch's plate, for spirits to nibble on. Now, witch isn't really a good translation for the cailleach, but that's a story for another day. Parents, worried about their kids being snatched up by fairies, would disguise themselves and their poshti with animal furs and soot or mud, eventually evolving into masks and costumes to make any would-be supernatural kidnappers think they were one of them. Kids, using their new personas to their advantage, would go house to house, making use of the food that people were giving out to any rambling fairies, or more beneficently, leaving blessings on the house in return for food. Thus, we have the origin of costumes and trick-or-treating. One other tradition is a bit of a tangent, but it's a fun one, so stick with me here. There once was a drunkard named Stingy Jack. Through his ramblings and his many acts of mischief, his name spread far and wide until one day it even caught the ear of the devil himself. The devil really wanted to test Jack's drinking ability, so the two went for a feed of pints in the local pub. When the night was near over and the barman asked to settle the tab, Jack told the devil that it would be a great idea for him to shapeshift into a coin and use that to pay the bill. The devil drunkenly agreed, but instead of going to the barman and sneaking back out again as planned, the devil unwittingly found himself in Jack's pocket next to a silver cross, trapping him inside. Jack agreed to let him out if he would spare his soul for a year, and the two men went their separate ways. Well, 1 year later to the day, the devil came back for the trickster's soul, but before taking him to hell, the devil asked Jack if he had any last requests. Jack saw a beautiful, shiny red apple high up on a tree and asked the devil to climb up and give it to him as a last meal. Well, before the devil had even plucked the apple from the tree, Jack pulled out a knife and carved the cross into the bark. Absolutely raging to have fallen for the oldest trick in the book twice, Jack again agreed to let the devil down, but this time leave his soul for 10 years. Fate had other things in mind, however, and Jack died before his decade was up. Still angry at Jack for his tricks, the devil refused him entry to hell, but because he had made deals with the devil, Jack wasn't allowed into heaven either. Instead, the devil tossed him a burning coal from the depths of hell to light his way as Jack wandered the earth for eternity. Jack smartly, quickly curved out a turnip and tossed the coal in to make himself a makeshift lantern, and it's something we still put out on Halloween for Jack every year to take pity on the poor soul who can never rest. We didn't have any pumpkins in Europe, alright? Plus, this thing looks a hell of a lot scarier than the American jack-o'-lantern. Anyway, where were we? Obviously, after converting to Catholicism, there was great pressure on the Irish to stop celebrating their pagan rituals. That was until the year 601 when Pope Gregory published a new edict that said fighting against long-held traditions and beliefs was only slowing down the course of spreading the religion. Instead, they would try to incorporate different beliefs and use them as a starting point to explain the Bible to new people. It was edicts like this that let missionaries and colonizers spread the Bible to people in places like Africa and South America who had no knowledge of or interest in God. Looking at the spread of Christianity from all these places, it's not hard to see how popular this edict was. It was also put to use on already converted populaces, with one of Ireland's goddesses being stolen by the church. Bridget is one of the most important gods in the Irish Celtic pantheon, so much so that even centuries after converting, a lot of Irish people were still worshipping her on Imbod, the 1st of February, which marks the beginning of spring in the Irish calendar. Taking the if you can't beat them, join them approach, Bridget was taken as a saint and Imbod was turned into Saint Bridget's Day. It was also this edict that the Catholic Church tried to replace Samhain with All Saints' Day on November 1st. All Saints were seen as hallowed, as in hallowed be thy name. October 31st became known as All Hallows' Eve, which over the centuries changed and morphed into Halloween. Halloween first made its way to America at the start of the 18th century with the first wave of Irish and Scottish immigrants to the continent. However, it was seen, much like the immigrants themselves, as a dirty and backward celebration that was celebrated only by the diaspora and never too publicly. However, something big happened in 1840s Ireland that would massively speed up the immigration of Irish people and the adoption of Halloween. Another more was a man-made famine caused by the occupying British government in the 1840s that to this day is the most deadly famine per capita. Now, this isn't a video about the famine, it's just impossible to talk about Irish-American history without mentioning it. What is important in the context of this video is that by the end of the 19th century, there were now around 2 million Irish people in the fledgling United States. Most of these ended up in New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. Coincidentally, the first 3 cities where we see media coverage of this strange new holiday. In Philadelphia, Halloween found an early adopter and was already a fairly big event by the 1860s, with people dressing up and hosting parties to mark the occasion. The end of the 19th century saw the time of the year as a great boon to businesses for people selling masks, fruit, nuts, and other treats. From here, it spread to more mainstream society and really took off. This was also the perfect time to bring a Festival of the Dead to the US. After the Civil War in 1865, there wasn't a family in the country that wasn't glanced by the hand of the Grim Reaper. This, along with massive leaps in science of the time, made a lot of people take up the belief of spiritualism, trying to mix science with the occult. People believed anything was possible. This is where ideas of seances and fortune telling got huge in the US. And what better time to do it than a holiday celebrating death? However, just because people like the festival doesn't mean they like the immigrants who brought it with them. Here, we already see a holiday that's, at best, tenuously connected to its ancient roots. By this point, the upper middle class had taken what they liked from Halloween and really ran with it, hosting massive parties with piano players and fine silks, things Irish immigrants obviously didn't have, showing that Halloween is already starting to become gentrified. They also use these parties as an excuse to show off all their little clairvoyance and seances and fortune telling as if they were party tricks and nothing more. Then along comes the great Edgar Allan Poe, who cemented the idea of the macabre Halloween and wrapped it up with the gothic aesthetic that it's associated with today. While this was happening with adults, there was a radically new invention at the time, much scarier than anything Halloween had ever produced: the concept of a teenager. Now, although mischief was always a big part of the holiday, teenagers were trying to cause chaos because, well, they're teenagers. Pranks quickly became one of the biggest parts of Halloween, which caused a lot of controversy and people trying to curtail the holiday. Cities had to deputize citizens for the night to keep the teenagers under control. Walter Pritchard Eaton wrote, "Apple bobbing and trips down to the cellar with a lighted candle and a mirror to see your future spouse were all very well for girls and dress-up parties. But they weren't the essence of Halloween. For boys, it was robbery, destruction, arson." Eventually, people started hosting Halloween celebrations, figuring if you gave the teenagers something to do, they'd have less time to absolutely wreck the place. Teen dances were organized, and all of these measures helped, but didn't eliminate the problem entirely. As well as the teenagers, adults used the holiday to get absolutely flutered. This caused them to be a much bigger problem than the teenagers ever were and caused huge city-wide riots. After the 1934 World's Fair in Chicago, over 300,000 people took to the streets and, quote, drank everything in sight except Lake Michigan. Now, this happened in cities all over the country. This is just a very extreme example. Mix this with the high crime rates of the 50s and 60s and white upper-class families moving to the suburbs in what is called white flight. This made trick-or-treating much safer and much more community-friendly, while teenagers, now bored of the suburban existence, took to the streets cruising around looking for trouble. Within decades, Halloween was almost fully taken over by teenagers, driving through the streets to cause chaos and telling spooky stories and wearing costumes designed to attract mates, or partners, or however a documentarian would say it. This led to the creation of things like the slasher flick, which perpetuated these ideas into pop culture and made them even more prevalent. From here, Halloween was a runaway train that was all about candy, chaos, and coitus. I know I hate that word too, but I'm a sucker for alliteration, so we leave it. By this point, the origins of Halloween had all but been forgotten, and you would be forgiven for thinking that Halloween was an American holiday created to sell candy and hay rides. What's funny is, by the turn of the 20th century, the American idea of Halloween had made its way back to Ireland through pop culture. I personally had no idea that Halloween was Irish when I was growing up. But when I went trick-or-treating as a kid, it wasn't to honor my culture. It was because I saw the American kids do it in the movies, and it looks like a lot of fun. In Ireland, even to this day, anyone who goes too overboard with Halloween is seen as somebody with notions, or somebody who wants to be too American. But now, I thankfully get to close the video with some good news for the Irish, or for anyone who wants a more authentic Halloween experience. While some schools in the US seem to be working very hard to ban Halloween for being satanic, because guns are fine, they belong in schools, but getting to dress up and eat candy, that's a bit too far. In Ireland, people are reclaiming not just the holiday, but Irish culture in general. Although Halloween now is very different from its origins, Irish people take a lot of pride for creating something that is now so beloved around the world. We also now get to enjoy the best of both worlds. Of course, in Ireland, we love horror movies and we love eating sweets just as much as anyone. But with our newfound love of going back to our roots, there are a lot of art companies like Machnas who hold a massive parade every Halloween, mimicking the procession of invisible spirits that once passed through the land. And I said we would come back to the story of Tlachta, the sacred hill and goddess where it all began. Some tellings of the story have her, instead of her violent story written down, sacrificing herself to give birth to her 3 sons. Just as we re-examine these stories from the past, it makes us much more in tune with the land and the language that created Samhain. And just like the reclaiming of Tlachta and the oppressive story written about her, people now hold an annual Samhain festival on the hill that once bore her name in a celebration of life, death, the year ended, and possibly even to pray that the sun will rise again over the new year. I just want to give a massive thank you to everyone who has watched this video until the end. I know this is quite a bit shorter compared to my other videos, but there's a lot I had to cut out. I kept finding a bunch of cool stories that I wanted to include, but then realized the script was like a toddler telling their parents all the cool new dinosaur facts they just discovered. And like that hypothetical toddler, who definitely isn't a stand-in for me, it was overall gibberish, while containing some cool stuff. If you have stuck around this long and want some more of these stories, I have 2 great sources for you. One is Listen to the Land Speak by the incredible Manchán Magan, who sadly passed away just a few weeks ago. The man has inspired a whole generation of young Irish people to reclaim our culture and our language. The book only has 1 or 2 chapters on Samhain, but it's an incredible read for anyone wanting to learn about Irish folklore in general. Another source you can use is the very entertaining Dúchas website. Basically, it was a project started in the 1950s where the then President Eamon de Valera wanted to make sure that we stayed in touch with our roots while the country was modernizing very rapidly. So he asked everybody, particularly school children, to run home and ask basically any old person they could find to just write down stories from what it was like to grow up in 19th century, early 20th century Ireland, along with any folklore or kind of superstitions, any stories like that. Like with the story about Stingy Jack. One of my favorites is searching on the Dúchas website, stories about the devil. Because in Irish, the devil is very different from any depiction you see anywhere else. He's kind of an idiot, kind of a fool who people like to take advantage of. And he's almost used as kind of like comic relief, which is a very interesting take on the devil, I would say. Anyways, thanks a million again for watching, and I promise it won't be so long until my next upload. So until then, gur míle maith agaibh, and if you see a strange laughing person asking for food this Halloween, don't hold back, or you might find yourself in trouble with the fairies.